In the summer of 2018, a group of scientists climbed into a small motorboat on a secluded lake in northwestern Ontario. What they were about to do would sound outrageous to most people. Pour nearly 90 gallons of crude oil directly into the water. Over the next 2 hours, the team, composed of ecologists and chemists, carefully released the thick, black liquid into a series of isolated test zones in the lake. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't a mistake. And it definitely wasn't the plot of some villainous scheme in a movie. This was science, controlled, precise, and fully legal. In fact, at this unique research facility, such bold experiments aren't just allowed. They're encouraged. This wasn't even the first time strange substances had been poured into the lake. At one point, scientists dumped several tons of table sugar into the water. But we'll get to that story soon. Let's first talk about why anyone would deliberately pour oil into a lake. You've probably guessed the reason: to simulate oil spills in a natural setting. The logic is simple. When real oil spills occur, especially in freshwater systems, time is of the essence. Cleanup teams rush to contain the spill, minimize the damage, and protect nearby communities and ecosystems. There's usually little to no time to conduct detailed scientific studies. That's why, over 3 summers, researchers carried out intentional oil spills to understand their impact on lakes and boreal forest environments. The boreal region spans across vast areas of Canada, Russia, and Alaska, and is home to thousands of freshwater lakes and vital ecosystems. But despite its global significance, scientists have had limited opportunities to study how oil behaves in these sensitive environments. Traditionally, oil spill research has been done in laboratories or at the scenes of actual disasters. But both approaches have serious drawbacks. Lab studies, while controlled, can only replicate simplified versions of ecosystems. They can't match the complex interactions between soil, water, vegetation, and wildlife that occur in real lakes. On the other hand, studying actual oil spills is chaotic. There's often no baseline data, and conditions can change rapidly. Imagine trying to analyze a car crash after most of the wreckage has already been cleared. You're left guessing what happened, with no reliable reference point. That's how difficult it is to study the environmental effects of real oil spills after they happen. This is where the ISD Experimental Lakes Area comes in. Located in a remote stretch of northwestern Ontario, this 75 square kilometer facility is home to 58 small lakes, each of which can be studied and even manipulated over time. For over 5 decades, this site has served as a one-of-a-kind outdoor laboratory where scientists conduct real-world experiments on freshwater ecosystems. It's the only place on Earth where researchers have entire lakes at their disposal, lakes they can alter, monitor, and study over years, even decades. Because of this, the site has earned the nickname, the Super Collider of Ecology. Back to the oil. In 2018, researchers released varying amounts of oil into 8 separate test zones within a lake. The goal was to mimic spills of different scales, from small leaks to major disasters like the 2010 Kalamazoo River spill, one of the largest freshwater oil spills in U.S. history. Scientists then monitored the spread of oil through the water and studied its impact on aquatic life. Everything from insects and amphibians to fish and microbial communities. The following year, in 2019, a new phase of the experiment began. This time, the team set up 18 shoreline enclosures, each one designed to represent a small, self-contained environment. After adding oil to these zones, they tested a variety of cleanup techniques, absorbent pads, low-pressure water hoses, and more. But as they quickly discovered, traditional cleanup methods were far from perfect. Even after cleanup efforts, oily residue clung to plants and shorelines. So the scientists started exploring alternative solutions: biodegradable shoreline cleaners, oil-eating bacteria, and even floating wetlands, tiny artificial islands made of native plants, which had already shown promise in places like India and Pakistan. At this point, you might be wondering, who came up with the idea of turning entire lakes into outdoor laboratories? Why would anyone think it's okay to dump oil, sugar, or even mercury into pristine bodies of water? To understand that, we need to rewind to the late 1960s. At the time, Lake Erie, one of North America's 5 Great Lakes, was in serious trouble. Massive algae blooms were choking the water, killing fish, and turning clear lake water into green soup. The process, called eutrophication, occurs when excess nutrients, mainly from agricultural and urban runoff, cause explosive growth of algae. When the algae die and decompose, they consume large amounts of oxygen, leaving aquatic life gasping for air or dying off entirely. Back then, scientists didn't fully understand the mechanics behind eutrophication. Which pollutants were responsible? Was it farm runoff, industrial waste, urban sewage? To answer these questions, Canadian researchers Wally Johnson and Jack Valentine proposed a bold idea: conduct real-time experiments in actual lakes, under natural conditions. But they needed the right setting: remote, undisturbed, and free from human interference. They found it near the western edge of Ontario, about 2 hours from the town of Kenora. The terrain was perfect, thousands of small lakes scattered across rugged land, surrounded by dense spruce and pine forests. To this day, the site is only accessible via a single gravel road, and even that requires special permission. The lakes here are numbered, not named, a reflection of their scientific purpose. In 1969, the first major experiment took place on Lake 226. Researchers installed a giant plastic curtain across the lake, dividing it in half. Both sides received carbon and nitrogen, but only one side got phosphorus. The results were immediate and dramatic. The phosphorus-treated side exploded with algae growth. An aerial photo of the lake, showing one side crystal clear and the other murky green, made headlines. It became a landmark moment in environmental science. That image convinced politicians across North America to take action. In the 1970s, governments in both Canada and the U.S. passed legislation banning phosphates in household detergents, which had been a major source of phosphorus pollution. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few years, researchers continued to study how different substances interact in lakes. And that's where the sugar comes in. To simulate organic pollution, like the kind found in sewage, scientists began adding sucrose, the common table sugar, into the water. Large 24-pound bags of it, to be precise, delivered straight from Manitoba Sugar. In 1971 and 1972, they dosed a separate lake with a mixture of phosphorus, nitrogen, and sugar. As expected, algae blooms quickly followed. But in 1973, they changed things up. They continued adding nitrogen and sugar, but stopped adding phosphorus. The result? The lake began to heal. The algae blooms faded, oxygen levels stabilized, and aquatic life returned. It was a stunning discovery. Eutrophication could be reversed simply by cutting off the phosphorus supply. No need for expensive treatments or massive interventions. Just stop the flow of phosphorus, and the ecosystem can bounce back on its own. So why add sugar at all? Here's the theory. While they didn't want to transport actual wastewater to these remote lakes, researchers still needed to recreate its effects. Sugar acted as a stand-in for organic waste, providing carbon sources for microbes in the water. In short, it was a safe way to mimic real-world conditions. These pioneering experiments have had a lasting impact on environmental policy, lake management, and even global water quality standards. They've shown us that large-scale, long-term ecological research isn't just possible, it's essential. And while it may seem strange, pouring oil or dumping sugar into lakes, the insights gained from these experiments are helping protect freshwater ecosystems around the world. In the end, what might look like pollution is actually progress. Every drop of oil, every grain of sugar, every experiment at the experimental lakes area brings us closer to understanding how our actions affect the planet and how we can fix the damage we've already done. This is a river, and this is also a river. Even this. Yes, it's a river too, but you won't see them bubbling over rocks or glinting in the sunlight. That's because these rivers have all been buried, hidden underground beneath layers of concrete, asphalt, and time. At some point, across much of the United States and other parts of the world, burying rivers became standard practice. We paved over them, built roads and cities on top of them, and diverted their waters into underground pipes and culverts. Yet their presence is still felt, if you know how to look for it. In cities, dips and depressions in the landscape often reveal clues. Water always follows the lowest point in the terrain. So when you're walking through a city, maybe down a steep street in New York or London, you might unknowingly be tracing the path of a river flowing right beneath your feet. A river that most people have no idea is even there. Take Tibbetts Brook, for example. It begins north of the Bronx and winds its way into Van Cortlandt Park, where it feeds a small lake. But somewhere near Tibbet Avenue, the brook disappears. It dives underground, flowing through a massive 2-channel brick sewer that eventually drains into the Harlem River Ship Canal, a man-made waterway carved out in the 1890s, back when that part of the Bronx bordered Manhattan. But it wasn't always this way. Long before the brook was confined to a tunnel, it was a vibrant freshwater stream flowing above ground. The Lenape people, the area's original inhabitants, relied on this water source for survival. They fished its waters and hunted animals like muskrats, raccoons, rabbits, skunks, and many kinds of birds along its banks. The Lenape called the brook Molu, a word that translates to smooth or small stones, likely a nod to the stream's character. In the late 1600s, a man named Jacobus Van Cortlandt built a dam on the brook to power a sawmill and gristmill. The dam created a small lake. During the winter months, Van Cortlandt would harvest ice from the lake, and sell it locally. This marked one of the earliest human interventions that began reshaping the natural flow of Tibbetts Brook. By 1888, the city of New York had purchased the land to create what is now Van Cortlandt Park. At that time, the brook still flowed in plain sight, but as the 20th century rolled in, so did a wave of urban expansion. Between the 1930s and 1960s, several major highways were constructed, slicing through the park. Instead of preserving the brook, city planners buried it, diverting its waters into underground culverts so that swampy land could be dried and developed. To city officials back then, swamps and marshes were nuisances, places filled with mosquitoes, muck, and uncertainty. Covering Tibbetts Brook was seen as a way to tame the landscape and reclaim land for more productive use. But that transformation came with hidden costs. Over time, sediment, silt, and debris accumulated in the buried brook. And in 1979, the environmental consequences reached a tipping point. 4 storm sewers had been illegally connected to the brook, dumping untreated wastewater into its waters. The result? A massive fish die-off in the lake within Van Cortlandt Park. Today, if you walk the streets above it, you'd never suspect the brook still flows beneath. Only in its original headwaters in Westchester County does Tibbetts Brook still resemble a natural stream. Yet the story of Tibbetts Brook isn't unique. It's just one of dozens, if not hundreds, of similar stories across New York City and beyond. These hidden rivers were once vital lifelines for the communities they passed through. But as the city expanded, most of them were covered, redirected, and eventually forgotten. In the 17th, 18th, and even 19th centuries, New York relied not only on the mighty Hudson River, but also on a sprawling network of freshwater streams and tributaries. These smaller waterways provided drinking water, powered mills, supported agriculture, and sustained the local ecology. But in the 1800s, things started to change fast. As New York industrialized and its population ballooned, many of these streams were turned into open sewer drains. They became dumping grounds for household waste, industrial chemicals, and other pollutants. Unsurprisingly, this led to repeated outbreaks of waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid. To solve the problem, city engineers proposed a drastic solution: bury the streams, seal them off in underground tunnels, and use the freed-up surface land for development. And the city listened. While this wasn't ideal for the environment, it did help curb the spread of deadly diseases. It was a practical solution for a rapidly growing metropolis, and one that became the blueprint for countless other cities around the world. Still, nature has a way of resurfacing, literally. Today, some of these buried streams can still be found inside buildings, in basements where concrete has worn away. Tiny channels form as groundwater slowly pushes its way back to the surface. There have even been instances where people reported burst pipes, only to discover the leak was actually an underground stream reclaiming its path. One of the most well-known examples of a lost stream is Sunswick Creek in Queens. Back in the mid-1800s, Sunswick Creek had already started to suffer. Industrial runoff, inadequate sewage systems, and population growth in Long Island City and Astoria turned the once vibrant waterway into a foul, stagnant mess. By 1866, disease outbreaks near the creek became common. The water was so polluted and mosquito-infested that local residents constantly complained of the smell and health risks. In response, the creek was partially diverted into the sewer system around 1893, but that still wasn't enough. In 1915, city officials again proposed filling it in entirely. The estimated cost, over $100,000, a staggering figure at the time, equivalent to more than $3 million today. It wasn't until 1916 that the city finally took steps to reroute household wastewater and cover the creek completely. A masonry tunnel was built, the land was filled in and raised to street level, and Sunswick Creek faded from memory, reduced to a mere trickle beneath the city's foundations. But it's not all stories of loss. Some rivers are being revived. The Sawmill River, for instance, flows for 23 miles through Westchester County and into Yonkers, just north of New York City. In the early 1900s, the final stretch of the river, about 1,970 feet, was buried beneath downtown Yonkers. As the city grew, bridges over the river were expanded and moved closer together. Eventually, it seemed easier to just bury the river entirely rather than keep building around it. For decades, the sawmill flowed unseen beneath parking lots and city streets, but in a rare twist, it was brought back to life. In recent years, city planners undertook a project to daylight the Sawmill River, excavating the buried section and restoring it to an open-air stream. Now, people can walk beside its banks once again. It's a rare success story of urban ecological restoration. Still, stories like this are the exception, not the rule. In Baltimore, researchers at the University of Maryland found that 66% of streams have been buried. In Philadelphia, that figure jumps to 73%. Detroit has lost a staggering 85% of its streams since 1902. And in Washington, D.C., only 30% of the waterways that once flowed through the city in the early 1800s are still visible today. This isn't just an American issue. Take a walk through almost any city center around the world, and you might notice something strange. There aren't many visible rivers. Sure, you'll often see one main river, like the Thames in London or the Seine in Paris, but the smaller tributaries, they're often gone, buried like so many others. In Toronto, Canada, the entire downtown area is built over a vast network of hidden rivers. Clues to their existence can still be spotted: unexpected curves in the road, oddly placed trees, patches of reeds or willows, or even a dip in the pavement, small signs of the living waters below. In Montreal, old photographs show massive sewer tunnels being built to redirect the St. Pierre River. In London, part of the Westbourne River still flows through a large pipe suspended above the platforms of Sloane Square Tube Station, a surreal reminder of what once was. In the end, these buried rivers tell a story not just of urban growth, but of compromise between nature and civilization, health and development, memory and progress. But they're not entirely lost. If you pay close attention, you can still find the rivers hiding beneath the surface. They're flowing under your feet, whispering stories of a time when water shaped the land, not the other way around. And maybe, just maybe, the more we listen, the more we'll find ways to bring them back into the light. Turkey Point Nuclear Power Plant, operated by Florida Power and Light FPL, is not the most famous of its kind, but it holds a few notable distinctions. Located near Miami, this power plant houses two Westinghouse pressurized water reactors, each capable of generating 82 megawatts of electricity. Additionally, Turkey Point operates a gas-powered unit producing 1,150 megawatts, with a total capacity of 2,754 megawatts. It ranks as the third largest power plant in Florida and the 11th largest in the United States. But while these technical details may seem standard, the station's role in the area and its curious connection to wildlife goes beyond the typical narrative. When you think of a nuclear power plant like Turkey Point, a few things come to mind. The plant generates an enormous amount of electricity in a relatively small space, which is impressive on its own. However, the safety risks, particularly the long-term disposal of waste and the potential for catastrophic accidents like Chernobyl or Fukushima, often dominate the conversation. And then there are the alligators, or rather, American crocodiles. Although it may seem strange, these reptiles have a surprising relationship with the power plant. So, what's the story behind this unlikely connection? Turkey Point, located near the bustling city of Miami, produces around 14 million megawatt hours of electricity each year from its nuclear reactors, and an additional 6 million megawatt hours from natural gas. This output serves not only the city, but the entirety of Miami-Dade County. While the plant's benefits are apparent, it's not without controversy. Its operation raises concerns about emissions that affect the surrounding environment. One of the main environmental issues involves cooling the nuclear reactors. Like most nuclear plants, Turkey Point requires massive amounts of water to maintain safe operating temperatures for its reactors. Typically, power plants use either an open cycle system, which withdraws and releases water at a higher temperature, or a closed-loop system with cooling towers to manage the heat. However, Turkey Point took a different route altogether by directly discharging heated water into nearby Biscayne Bay, a practice that raised alarm bells among environmentalists. The cooling water used in nuclear reactors could contain radioactive elements like tritium, a form of hydrogen that emits beta radiation. When released into the environment, tritium can contaminate local ecosystems. If it enters an organism's body, it can disrupt DNA, leading to mutations and an increased risk of cancer. Moreover, tritium has a half-life of 12 years, meaning it remains active in biological tissues for a long time, continuously emitting radiation. This made the practice of dumping water into Biscayne Bay extremely concerning. In response to public outcry and environmental concerns, Turkey Point switched to a new cooling system. Nearby, a network of 39 artificial canals, each about 5 miles long, was created to handle the heat generated by the reactors. These canals, spanning a total area of 10 square miles, allow water to cool as it circulates. This new system has largely addressed the problem of discharging hot, possibly contaminated water into Biscayne Bay. A satellite image of the cooling system illustrates just how effective it is. The warmer the water, the brighter the red color on the map. As the water moves through the canal system, it gradually cools down, with the temperature decreasing the further it moves from the station. Ecologists are relieved that Turkey Point no longer discharges heated water into the bay. However, a new environmental problem has arisen. The cooling system's operation has caused the salinity of the canals to skyrocket. When the plant opened in 1973, the salinity was around 26.5%. By 2014, this figure had jumped to a staggering 95%. The issue is compounded by the fact that the canals aren't lined, allowing the salty water to seep into the ground, potentially contaminating the nearby Biscayne Aquifer, which supplies fresh drinking water to the region. So, while the cooling system has addressed one concern, it has created another, one that could impact the water supply for millions of people. Despite the environmental concerns, there's a fascinating silver lining to Turkey Point's operations: the American crocodile. Unlike alligators, which are more common and not protected, the American crocodile is an endangered species. In 1975, it was placed on the endangered species list, with fewer than 300 individuals remaining in Florida. This species thrives in saltwater and brackish environments like bays, mangrove swamps, and river mouths, habitats that happen to be in close proximity to the power plant. The canals, which have increased salinity and consistently warm water, offer an ideal environment for these crocodiles, who seek out warm habitats for sunbathing and nesting. In 1976, the first American crocodile eggs were discovered in the ponds of Turkey Point. While no one knows exactly how they ended up there, the crocodiles likely found a sanctuary in the plant's cooling canals. The surrounding area, including the Biscayne and Everglades National Parks, provides a habitat where American crocodiles can thrive, though they were scarce at the time. The network of artificial canals is a perfect habitat for crocodiles because of the warm water and the salinity levels that suit their needs. Interestingly, American crocodiles require fresh water for the early stages of their lives. Young crocodiles spend their first 3 months in freshwater environments before they develop the salt glands necessary for survival in saltwater. The canals near Turkey Point provide a mixture of salt and fresh water, which is ideal for young crocodiles. Each canal is separated by berms, elongated islands, where female crocodiles can lay their eggs, protected from human disturbance. At Turkey Point, the crocodiles have found an unintended sanctuary. The cooling canals are relatively undisturbed by human activity, with access restricted to protect both the animals and plant workers. In fact, researchers have worked diligently to monitor and protect the crocodile population, conducting nighttime surveys to check on the young hatchlings. Over the years, they've tagged more than 10,000 crocodiles, contributing to one of the most comprehensive data sets on any reptile species in the world. Thanks to these efforts, the American crocodile population around Turkey Point has flourished. In 2024, 529 hatchlings were documented in the cooling canals, meaning the population is growing rapidly. Researchers estimate that the population around Turkey Point has now surpassed 2,000 individuals, a stark contrast to the fewer than 300 crocodiles that remained in Florida in the 1970s. This growth can be directly attributed to the cooling canals, which have inadvertently created a perfect environment for the crocodiles to thrive. But the story doesn't end there. While the crocodile population has increased, there are still concerns about the potential impact of tritium contamination. Some experts question whether the radioactive water might be affecting the health of the reptiles, although there's no conclusive evidence to support this. In 2016, tests found elevated levels of tritium in the bay waters, but Florida Power and Light maintains that the water in the canals is not in contact with radioactive elements. The lack of canal lining remains a potential concern, as it could allow contaminated water to seep into the aquifer and bay, though the company insists this isn't an issue. Despite the uncertainty surrounding tritium, the overall health of the crocodile population appears unaffected. Researchers continue to monitor the population, and the number of hatchlings born each year is steadily increasing, indicating that the species is doing well. Turkey Point provides an interesting example of how human activity, even when it seems detrimental to the environment, can sometimes inadvertently benefit wildlife.